Conservation and restoration are becoming more and more crucial to the survival of ecosystems around the world. Conservation protects biodiversity and minimizes further damage, while restoration repairs damage done by human interaction. And there are a few different approaches to conservation, one of which is known as the hotspot approach. Biodiversity hotspots are considered to be the most critical areas to preserve in order to sustain biodiversity. And to be considered a hotspot, an area would have had to have lost at least 70% of its original habitat. We have a couple hotspots in Florida, one of which are the longleaf pine forests, which were nearly wiped out in the early 1900s due to logging and timber industry. Longleaf pine forests are home to over 1,200 species of plants and animals, and 30 of those are considered threatened or endangered. So when restoring an area such as a forest, conditions first have to be assessed so that the cause of damage can be determined, cause or causes, particularly if it's due to human interaction. And that way, a plan can be made for restoring and protecting the area, the ecosystem, and also to monitor its progress. So, for restoration of forest, things that might be included would be closing roads, removing invasive species, controlling livestock grazing, and as in the case with longleaf pine, prescribed burns. Crew Land and Water Trust is a local example of a longleaf pine forest that is currently under conservation and restoration laws. You can see on the left is a picture of a prescribed burn that took place here a couple years ago. And the reason for this is to clear out the accumulation of material on the ground to allow the new growth to come through. It also helps to replenish nutrients into the soil. One of the species inhabiting the longleaf pine forests, and it has also been a species that's been skirting the endangered list for quite some time, is the gopher tortoise. And this is also an example of another approach to conservation known as the species approach. The gopher tortoise is what's known as a keystone species. And what that means is that this species helps define the entire ecosystem in which it lives. And without this species, that ecosystem would be dramatically different or even cease altogether. And the reason that the gopher tortoise is considered a keystone species is that it supports about 350 other species within its habitat, species that use the gopher tortoise burrow for shelter. Another example of a local conservation and restoration project is the Naples Preserve, and this is also a longleaf pine forest that has been preserved. And it's a good example of how successfully a species can come back when its ecosystem is restored. Here, an interesting difference is that at the Naples Preserve, because they're close within the city, they can't do prescribed burns here. So what they do instead is continually manually clear the ground, uh, the underbrush and debris that naturally falls to the ground, and this uncovers the young saplings, the young plant growth that is food for the gopher tortoise. And at the Naples Preserve, they have even had breeding tortoise and hatchlings from time to time. So it's an example of an area of conservation and restoration that has been very successful.